my sister's boyfriend, saw my daughter's smartwatch and instantly went pale. It was the garish bubblegum pink of my daughter's new smartwatch that gave her away. The party was in full swing, a chaotic symphony of 7-year-old shrieks and the crinkle of wrapping paper. My late husband's mother, Eleanor, was holding court by the French doors, a flute of champagne in her hand, looking every bit the benevolent matriarch. She had insisted on hosting Lily's birthday at her grand, sterile house, a gesture that was, like all her gestures, equal parts generosity and control. I had agreed because I was tired of fighting, and because I had a plan, a desperate, long-shot plan that was coiled tight in my stomach. Eleanor glided over to me, her smile a perfect, lacquered curve. "You look tired, dear," she said, her voice a low purr of concern that always felt like a judgment. "Are you keeping up with your supplements? You know how fragile you get when you're run down." She touched my arm, her fingers cold. For the past year, since my husband David's sudden death, this had been her refrain. My fragility, my grief, my supposed inability to cope without her steadying hand on my life, my finances, and my daughter. She had been so helpful, so involved, preparing special teas for my anxiety, bringing me home-cooked meals I could barely stomach, reminding me to take the vitamins she'd researched so carefully. My sister, Chloe, materialized at my side, her boyfriend Mark in tow. Chloe shot Eleanor a look that could curdle milk. She'd never trusted her. "She looks fine, Eleanor. We were just admiring Lily's new watch." She tapped the pink plastic band on our daughter's wrist as Lily ran past, chasing a balloon. "Mark got it for her. It's got all the bells and whistles." Eleanor's gaze flickered to the watch. "How lovely. A bit loud for a child, isn't it? All this technology. It's not good for them." She waved a dismissive hand. "But it's the thought that counts, I suppose." That's when it happened. Mark, who worked in cybersecurity, leaned in for a closer look at the watch on Lily's wrist as she paused to show him a feature. His easy smile tightened. His eyes widened just for a second, and he glanced at me, his face suddenly ashen. He saw the app icon I had hidden on the second screen, the one disguised as a simple game. He saw the small, pulsing red dot in the corner of the screen that indicated it was actively recording audio. He understood immediately. He looked from the watch to me and then to Eleanor, and a flicker of comprehension and horror passed through his eyes. He knew I was setting a trap. He just didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. I gave him the slightest shake of my head, a silent plea. "Not yet. Don't give it away." He swallowed hard and straightened up, pulling Chloe a little closer. The air crackled. The happy noise of the party seemed to fade into a distant hum. It was just me and Eleanor standing in a bubble of cold silence. She hadn't noticed Mark's reaction. Her focus was entirely on me, her eyes glittering with a strange, proprietary light. She thought she was winning. She thought I was finally broken. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "I've been meaning to talk to you, Eleanor, about the supplements." Her smile didn't falter. "Of course, dear. Are they helping? I can get you a stronger dose of the herbal tincture if you're still feeling overwhelmed." Later, after the children had been picked up and the house was quiet, the three of us sat in Eleanor's cavernous living room. Lily was with Chloe and Mark, safely out of the house. It was time. The smartwatch, still on Lily's wrist, was gone, its precious data now being uploaded to a secure cloud server by Mark in his car. All I had to do was get the rest. "I'm not taking them anymore," I said, placing the bottle of pills she'd given me on the marble coffee table between us. "My doctor says my blood work is strange. He's concerned." Eleanor sighed, a theatrical display of patience. "Oh, darling, you can't listen to those doctors. They just push pharmaceuticals. What I give you is natural. It's what your body needs to heal from the trauma." She leaned forward, her voice dropping into that conspiratorial whisper she used when she was about to deliver a killing blow disguised as kindness. "David would have wanted you to listen to me. He always said I knew what was best." That was the line, the one she always used, my husband's memory, weaponized against me. The rage that had been simmering for months began to boil. "What was in them, Eleanor?" She laughed, a tinkling, brittle sound. "Herbs, my dear. Valerian root for your nerves. Chamomile. Nothing to be alarmed about." She picked up the bottle and examined it. "You've become so paranoid. It's the grief, you see. It plays tricks on the mind. Perhaps we should consider getting you more intensive help. A facility, maybe. Just for a little while until you're feeling more yourself. Lily could stay here with me. She'd be safe." And there it was. The endgame. The final move to have me declared unstable. To get guardianship of my daughter and full control of the inheritance David had left for us. The fog that had clouded my mind for a year. The constant exhaustion. The dizziness. The memory lapses. The creeping paranoia that she had so expertly nurtured. It all burned away in a flash of white-hot clarity. "You have been poisoning me," I said. It wasn't a question. The mask dropped. The benevolent smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter contempt. The change was so sudden, so complete, it was like watching a different person emerge. She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned back, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She thought she was untouchable. She thought my word meant nothing against hers. "Poisoning is such an ugly word," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "I was helping you. You were a wreck after David died. Hysterical. Unfit. I was simply managing the situation. Giving you what you needed to be calm, to be suggestible. You were making such poor decisions. My son worked his entire life to build that estate. Did you really think I was going to let his flighty, unstable little wife squander it all? And on what? Art therapy and grief counseling? My breath caught in my throat. The confession was so blatant, so remorseless, it was breathtaking. She was gloating. She was performing a victory lap, convinced she had already won. You've been unwell for a long time, you know, she continued, warming to her theme. Even David saw it. He worried constantly. He told me, "Mother, if anything happens to me, you have to look after her. She's not strong enough. I am simply honoring my son's final wishes. Everyone can see how you're struggling, crying all the time, forgetting things, accusing me of these fantasies." She gestured around the opulent room. Who do you think they will believe? Me or the grieving widow who is clearly having a psychotic break? She stood up and walked to the grand fireplace, picking up a framed photo of David. He deserved better. He deserved a strong wife, not a needy child. But now it's all right. I'll raise his daughter. Lily will be raised properly, with discipline and structure. She will be a worthy legacy for my son. And you will get the help you so desperately need. Every word was a confirmation of my darkest fears. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the slow, methodical campaign to erode my sanity and my credibility. It had all been real. I wasn't crazy. I was being systematically dismantled. But what she didn't know was that her monologue, her gleeful, damning confession, wasn't being delivered to an audience of one. She thought she was speaking to a broken woman in a locked room. She had no idea she was speaking to a future jury. My sister Chloe burst through the door then, her phone in her hand, already connected to 911. Mark was right behind her, his face grim. "We heard everything, Eleanor," Chloe said, her voice shaking with rage. "The police are on their way." Eleanor's face contorted, first with shock, then with pure, undiluted fury. She looked at me, her eyes burning with hatred. She finally understood. The smartwatch, the open living room door, my sister waiting in the hall. It had all been a setup. Her arrogance had been her undoing. The benevolent matriarch was gone forever, replaced by the monster that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The days that followed were a blur of police stations, lawyers' offices, and sterile hospital rooms. The first thing my new lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, told me was to document everything. "Write it all down," she'd said, sliding a legal pad across her desk. "Every conversation, every meal she made you, every time you felt dizzy or confused. Dates, times, details. Your memory is the first crime scene. We have to secure it." So I wrote. I filled notebook after notebook, my hand cramping as I dredged up the painful memories of the past year. I wrote about the calming tea she'd insisted I drink every night, the one that left a metallic aftertaste and made my head swim. I wrote about the headaches, the blurred vision, the terrifying moments of dissociation where I'd feel like I was floating outside my own body. I detailed how she'd isolated me from my friends, telling them I was too fragile for visitors, intercepting my calls. I documented every time she'd undermined my parenting, telling Lily that Mommy is very sad and confused right now, so you must listen to Grandma. Each memory was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. The timeline I constructed was chilling. The onset of my symptoms coincided perfectly with the period after David's funeral, when Eleanor had moved into my guest room to help. The symptoms had worsened every time I'd resisted her control and miraculously abated during a week-long trip I'd taken with Chloe to the beach, a trip Eleanor had vehemently opposed, warning that the stress would be too much for my delicate system. While I was excavating my own mind, Mark was digging into the technology. The audio file from the smartwatch was crystal clear. Sarah called it the crown jewel of our case, a confession so arrogant and explicit it was almost unbelievable. But she warned me it might not be enough. "A good lawyer will argue you coerced her, that you edited the tape. We need more. We need forensics." That led to the most humiliating and validating part of the process, the medical tests. I submitted to blood panels, urinalysis, and finally, a hair follicle test. It required a thick lock of my hair to be cut from the nape of my neck, a small physical sacrifice in this fight for my life. We had to get a court order to exhume David. It was a grotesque thought, disturbing his rest, but Sarah and the detective assigned to the case, a grim-faced man named Detective Miller, were insistent. If she was poisoning me, had she done the same to her own son? David's death had been recorded as a sudden, massive heart attack. He was 42 and had no history of heart disease. At the time, in the fog of my shock and grief, I hadn't questioned it. Now, it seemed horribly plausible. My support system became my lifeline. Chloe was a constant presence, a fierce guardian who screened my calls and made sure I was eating. Mark, bless his quiet, steady soul, used his skills to build a fortress around my digital life, securing my accounts and finding traces of spyware Eleanor had installed on my phone and laptop. My sponsor for my recovery program, a woman who had been sober for 20 years, became my rock. Eleanor knew about my past struggles with alcohol in my early 20s. It was a vulnerability she had exploited mercilessly, constantly hinting to others that my grief might trigger a relapse, planting seeds of doubt about my stability. My sponsor, Joan, reminded me daily that my past did not define my present, and that my sobriety was a source of strength, not shame. Eleanor, of course, did not go quietly. Once she was out on bail, her immense wealth making it a trivial inconvenience, the retaliation began. It was swift and brutal. Her first move was to file an emergency motion for temporary custody of Lily, citing my erratic behavior, paranoid delusions, and a history of substance abuse. Her petition was a masterpiece of character assassination, twisting my grief into hysteria, my justifiable fear into psychosis. She attached a letter from my former therapist, a woman Eleanor had recommended and befriended, who stated that I suffered from a personality disorder and was prone to fantasies. It was a devastating blow. I felt the floor drop out from under me. She had been laying the groundwork for this for months, perhaps years. Then came the family pressure. David's aunts, uncles, and cousins began to call. Some were cautious, asking for Eleanor's side of the story. Others were openly hostile. "How could you do this to a grieving mother?" one of David's cousins screamed at me over the phone. "Eleanor has done nothing but support you, and you repay her by inventing these disgusting lies." They had been fed a steady diet of Eleanor's narrative for a year. To them, she was the stoic matriarch, and I was the unstable, ungrateful outsider. I was forced to block numbers, to retreat into my small circle of allies. The world she had built around me was now being used as a cage. The financial pressure was immense. My access to David's estate was frozen, pending the outcome of the legal battles. Eleanor's lawyers contested everything, burying me in paperwork and legal fees. She offered a settlement through her attorney, drop all charges, submit to a psychiatric evaluation at a facility of her choosing, and sign over primary custody of Lily to her. In return, she would provide me with a generous monthly allowance and allow me supervised visitation. The offer was an insult, a demand for my complete and total surrender. It was also tempting. The fight was exhausting me, draining my finances and my spirit. There were dark nights when I lay awake, the weight of it all crushing me, and I wondered if giving up would be easier. The thought of Lily and her care was the only thing that kept me going. The investigative process was a slow, grinding machine that seemed to run on paperwork and frustration. Detective Miller was methodical, his face a permanent mask of weary cynicism. He seemed to believe me, but he made it clear that belief was not evidence. We waited weeks for the toxicology reports. It felt like holding my breath for an eternity. The first breakthrough came from Mark. He had been given permission by the police to analyze Eleanor's home computer, which had been seized under a warrant. Buried deep in her browser history, he found what we needed: searches for tasteless, odorless poisons, symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning, and how to contest a will based on mental incompetence. He also found that she had ordered large quantities of something called aconite, also known as wolfsbane, from a shady online herbalist. It was a classic poison, difficult to detect in standard toxicology screens because it mimics the symptoms of a heart attack. The second breakthrough was the toxicology report on my hair. It showed elevated levels of heavy metals, but more importantly, traces of the specific alkaloids found in aconite. The lab technician explained that the poison had been administered in small, regular doses over a long period, designed not to kill me quickly, but to slowly break down my physical and mental health, to make me seem crazy. The final, most horrifying piece of evidence came from David's exhumation. The coroner found the same alkaloids in his tissue samples. He hadn't had a heart attack. He had been murdered. Eleanor had killed her own son. The motive became sickeningly clear as Mark and a forensic accountant sifted through the estate's finances. David had discovered that Eleanor had been embezzling from the family trust for years. A week before his death, he had confronted her and told her he was cutting her off. He had scheduled a meeting with his lawyer to amend his will, removing her as a trustee and as Lily's contingent guardian. He died the day before that meeting. The case shifted from a domestic dispute to a homicide investigation. The smartwatch recording, once the centerpiece of our case, was now just the opening chapter of a much darker story. My personal fight for vindication had become a fight for justice for my murdered husband. Sarah and the district attorney's office made a strategic decision. They would prosecute Eleanor for David's murder first. It was the stronger case, with clear financial motive and now forensic evidence. My own poisoning case would be secondary, used as supporting evidence of her methods and character. I had to make peace with the fact that what she had done to me, the year of my life she had stolen through a haze of poison and gaslighting, would be a footnote in the story of her greater crime. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but my focus was singular, ensuring she could never harm anyone again, especially not my daughter. The pre-trial motions were a war of attrition. Eleanor's high-priced legal team tried everything to get the evidence suppressed. They argued that the smartwatch recording was an illegal wiretap, that the computer search was an invasion of privacy, that my testimony was unreliable due to my history of mental instability. The judge, a stern, older woman with piercing eyes, denied their motions one by one. She listened to the smartwatch recording in her chambers. When she returned to the bench, the look she gave Eleanor was one of utter revulsion. For the first time since this began, I felt a flicker of hope. The system, for all its flaws, might actually work. The day I had to testify was the hardest day of my life. I walked into the courtroom feeling like an exposed nerve. Eleanor was sitting at the defendant's table, looking small and frail in a conservative gray suit. She looked like a harmless grandmother. She met my eyes once, and there was no remorse in her gaze, only cold reptilian fury. She hated me for surviving. Sarah had prepped me for hours, for days. days. They are going to attack you, she'd warned. They will bring up your past. They will call you a liar, a drunk, an unfit mother. They will try to make you angry, to make you cry. You cannot let them. You have to be calm. You have to be a rock. I had a small, smooth stone in my pocket that Joan had given me. I clutched it in my hand as I walked to the witness stand, its coolness a small anchor in a sea of fear. My testimony under the prosecutor's questioning was straightforward. I recounted the events of the past year, my voice flat and emotionless as I described the tea, the supplements, the growing confusion and illness. I described the birthday party, the smartwatch, and the chilling confession in the living room. The prosecutor played the recording for the jury. The sound of Eleanor's smug, cruel voice filled the silent courtroom. Several jurors flinched. One shook her head in disbelief. Then came the cross-examination. Eleanor's lawyer was a slick, silver-haired man who oozed condescending charm. He started gently, asking about my grief, my sadness after David's death. Then he moved in for the kill. "Isn't it true, madam, that you have a history of alcohol abuse?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I am a recovering alcoholic. I have been sober for 10 years, I said, my voice clear and steady. 10 years. Commendable," he sneered. "But grief is a powerful trigger, is it not? Isn't it possible that the symptoms you describe, the memory loss, the confusion, the paranoia, were not the result of some elaborate poisoning plot, but rather the effects of a relapse you are trying to hide?" "I did not relapse," I said, looking directly at the jury. "I was tested for alcohol and drugs repeatedly during my medical examinations. The results were all negative." He shifted tactics, bringing up my therapy sessions, twisting my words, painting me as an emotionally volatile woman who resented her powerful mother-in-law. He tried to portray the entire situation as a custody battle, a desperate attempt on my part to cut Eleanor out of her granddaughter's life. "So you expect this jury to believe," he said, his voice rising with theatrical incredulity, "that this loving grandmother, this pillar of the community, murdered her own son and then orchestrated a year-long Machiavellian plot to poison you, all based on a recording from a child's toy?" I took a deep breath, clutching the stone in my pocket. "I don't expect them to believe me," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I expect them to believe the forensic evidence, the toxicology reports, the financial records, and their own ears." I glanced at Eleanor. She told me what she did, and she was proud of it. The rest of the trial unfolded methodically. The forensic toxicologist explained the effects of aconite, his testimony dry and clinical but utterly damning. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the complex web of financial transactions, showing how Eleanor had siphoned millions and how David had discovered it just before his death. Mark testified about the computer searches, his quiet competence, a stark contrast to the defense attorney's bluster. The verdict came after 2 days of deliberation. I sat in the courtroom, holding Chloe's hand on one side and Joan's on the other. My stomach was in knots. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. "On the charge of murder in the first degree," the jury foreperson said, "we, the jury, find the defendant, Eleanor Vance, guilty." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. Tears I hadn't realized I was holding back began to stream down my face. She was guilty. They believed me. They believed David. She was also found guilty of aggravated assault against me, the legal term for the poisoning. It felt secondary, but it was there. It was on the record. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no flicker of emotion on Eleanor's face as she was led away. Her mask of composure was perfect, even in utter defeat. The Vance family members who had supported her, who had ostracized me, filed out of the courtroom in silence, refusing to meet my eyes. The battle was over, but the war, I was learning, was far from finished. The end of the trial was not a finish line. There was no sudden flood of relief, no triumphant sense of closure. There was just quiet, an unsettling, empty quiet where the fight used to be. The legal victory was absolute, but the justice felt incomplete. A prison sentence couldn't give David back his life. It couldn't erase the year of terror and confusion she had put me through. It couldn't undo the psychological scars. In therapy, I grappled with this. My therapist, a kind woman who had been vetted by Sarah, helped me understand that my feelings were normal. "The legal system provides accountability, not healing," she told me. "The verdict is the end of her story. Now you get to start writing yours." Rebuilding my life was a slow, deliberate process. It was practical, mundane work. I had to sort through the financial wreckage of the estate, a task that took months with the help of a new, trustworthy estate lawyer. I found a new house for me and Lily, a small, sunny place with a big backyard, far away from the oppressive grandeur of Eleanor's world. It was a space that felt like ours, filled with our own things, our own memories. I went back to work part-time as a graphic designer, reclaiming a piece of my identity that had nothing to do with being a wife, a widow, or a victim. The most important work was establishing permanent, non-negotiable boundaries. I sent a single, brief email, drafted by my lawyer, to the extended Vance family. It stated that any and all future communication regarding Lily was to go through my attorney's office. I explained that for the well-being of my daughter and myself, we would be severing all personal contact. It was a final, decisive act of self-preservation. Some of them sent angry, wounded replies. I deleted them without reading. Their validation was no longer something I needed. My peace was more important than their absolution. There are still hard days. A certain scent will remind me of her tea, and a wave of nausea will wash over me. A news story about a family dispute will make my heart pound. The trauma is a part of me now, a scar on my soul, but it is not all of me. I am learning to live with the scars, to see them not as evidence of my weakness, but of my survival. My focus is Lily. She knows that her grandmother is in a place for people who break big rules and won't be coming back. She misses the grandmother she thought she had, and we talk about that. I am determined to give her a childhood free from the shadows of manipulation and deceit that defined my life for so long. I am teaching her to trust her own instincts, to use her voice, to know that her feelings are valid, always. Sometimes I look at that bubblegum pink smartwatch, which now sits in a box of keepsakes. It's such a small, silly thing, a child's toy. It's hard to believe it was the key that unlocked a nightmare, the catalyst for my liberation. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones your enemy never sees coming. Last night, Lily and I were planting flowers in our new garden. Her hands were covered in dirt, and she had a smudge of mud on her nose. She looked up at me, her face so much like David's, and gave me a brilliant, unclouded smile. The sun was warm on my face, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of profound, unshakable peace. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was calm. It was safe. It was ours. It's a bittersweet victory, for sure. I lost my husband, a year of my life, and the illusion of a family. But in the wreckage, I found myself. I found my strength, and I saved my daughter. It wasn't the ending I ever would have wanted, but it's a beginning I can finally live with. And really, after a story this long and frankly, this exhausting, a quiet beginning is all anyone could ask for. You made it to the end. You deserve a medal, or at least a very strong cup of tea. Just, maybe make it yourself. Please subscribe.